What is decolonization? Decolonizing is a trending word used as a social commentary on the colonialism of old and the neocolonialism that persists to this day. Decolonizing is not only relevant to native peoples of the Americas, but African, Asian, and even European demographics that have been plundered and underserved since the Age of Discovery. The first people white people colonized was themselves. But decolonizing is such a loaded term. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Let's unpack this definition today and determine a healthy definition for this term of resistance. Hello everyone, I am Solomon Pakal. A little information about me relevant to this topic today. I am of indigenous Kachikel Maya descent. I come from a lineage of indigenous Maya brujas, as colonialism likes to say it. That term bruja is a colonial import, but it's safe to say that I come from a tradition of esoteric practice that is pre-Columbian. The topic of decolonization is highly relevant to my lived experience as well as many other natives, diasporic or native. I myself have been victim to racial discrimination based upon my native heritage. But I am also a historian. And when it comes to the topic of today's video, I want to take both an emotional stance, but a logical stance as well, so that I can provide the best value possible and contribution to defining this very fiery word of decolonization. I would also like to add that I have extensive travel around the world and have seen what decolonizing matters can mean in places such as Southeastern Europe, Southwestern India, Eastern Africa, North Africa, as well as parts of Central America. The decolonizing ideas certainly change from region to region and between demographic differences. But there is kind of a perennial, unifying understanding of what decolonizing is at its essence. However, there are some harsh differences depending on who you talk to, and I think those need to be properly defined and elaborated on. And to be honest, some of these partial definitions do need to be discarded or recalibrated for our modern day, for the sake of societal cohesion. Before we define decolonizing, let's talk about why it's actually important. We can split its important aspects down the middle, as in there are negative aspects of why we should be decolonizing, and there are positive aspects and motivations of why we should be decolonizing. Let us cover the negative aspects first. Now, also when we are talking about decolonization, I am specifically narrowing down spiritual-based communities. Decolonizing is a term that also branches out into more societal, communal, again, social commentary, but a lot of these things are interweaved into one another. And what is highly relevant to the social commentary is also highly relevant to the spiritual and religious commentary. Alternative religion goes hand in hand with decolonization, because conventional religion goes hand in hand with colonization. But here you're going to have a lot of practical takeaways because this is about spiritual development and the act of decolonizing. Let's address the negative aspects and motivations for why decolonizing is important. When spiritual communities are built on lies, they are brittle. When spiritual communities center on non-indigenous authorities for indigenous traditions, indigenous practitioners get marginalized and indigenous integrity degrades. When communities do not do decolonizing work, they replicate colonial violence. And currently, some of the most popular indigenous forms of magic and spirituality are pure cultural appropriation. Now let's cover some of the positive aspects and motivations of why decolonizing matters. With decolonizing, we can properly move away from guru-centered leadership models to community-sustained models of leadership. Decolonizing opens the door for resilience through accurate historical grounding. Decolonizing work prevents burnout through distributed authority. This is because more authority figures become more knowledgeable on the actual practices. Decolonizing work can also provide a clear plan of succession that actually honors origins. And I think most practically, proper decolonizing work just allows for better overall magic and spirituality all around, because we're getting more accurate and down to the core essentials of what these practices used to be and can be. So now that we know of the pitfalls and the benefits of decolonizing, let us define what it can actually mean. Decolonization in esoteric practice means recognizing how colonialism has shaped spiritual transmission itself, the methods, the authorities, the very categories we use to understand what authentic practice means. So now let us define what decolonization is not in a healthy way. Decolonization is not a hashtag or a buzzword used to simply claim some kind of solidarity with Native communities. It is not about shaming people for their ancestry or making spiritual practice into a DNA test. It is not about destroying everything that came through colonial contact or pretending that syncretism is inherently corrupted. It is not about creating new hierarchies where being indigenous automatically makes you right about everything. And it is not about white guilt-driven paralysis. I think clearing up what decolonization is not is probably the most important part of this video and discussion. Some of the greatest contributors to decolonization work are some of the archaeologists and scholars that I have known personally, and they are essentially doing ancestral work on behalf of Native people because of where they are in their positions. They come to the cultures with the utmost respect and love in their hearts, and they become immersed in these cultures and immersed in the history. For that, I'm truly grateful for a lot of the archaeologists and scholars I have met, because without them, we wouldn't have quality information on our Native peoples. There are a lot of stereotypes against academics, as in, like, we can't trust them and they're part of, like, the machine, the cabal of, like, gatekeepers for Native knowledge. And there are some cases of that happening, but that is not the majority. The majority of academics, archaeologists, anthropologists, they want to find amazing things. That's why they got into the business in the first place. At least the majority of them. There's a lot of kind-hearted, good, well-intentioned academics that I personally do trust. To one of the other points, this is not about creating new hierarchies based upon Native DNA. Here's the sad truth. Because of low literacy rates in Native communities, both in and outside the United States, you will find many Natives that actually have no knowledge of their own culture. With proper decolonizing work, we can actually show the incentive for Native people getting back into their culture. Keep in mind that a lot of Native people outright deny their indigeneity for fear of being racially ostracized. They will try to lie that they are another ethnicity, especially in countries south of the border. When the consequences are you could be met with physical violence, yeah, you will lie to protect you and your family. We need to realize what syncretism actually was, and it doesn't mean that it's all bad, but we do need to recognize that syncretism was a survival device for the last 500 years. In the mid-2020s and beyond, do we really need the same survival mechanism? Yes, many of our grandmothers pray to folk saints, but is the practice of using European faces to cover up indigenous faces a practice that we really want to maintain? I understand it's tradition, but it is tradition that has only been around for 500 years for very harsh conditions. I'm not saying abandon all the folk saint statues, but I am raising the question. After raising the question, people are left with a crossroads decision. It's everyone's own personal practice, but they should be knowledgeable before making the choice. They should have all the information to their disposal and then ask themselves, do they really want to still practice this or not going forward? And I want to retouch on decolonizing not being a hashtag or a buzzword. This is because in esoteric and spiritual circles, decolonization has been used as a buzzword. Ironically, on two very extreme sides of the aisle. On the far left, many people will claim decolonizing practice, and it really is just a blanket for any kind of spiritual practice that isn't Christianity. This is filled with historical fallacies. I have seen native-based decolonizing practices incorporate other European-based gods in the place of indigenous gods. This isn't decolonizing, this is recolonizing with another face. And it typically comes from the reason of these native practitioners or these so-called native practitioners that have book deals or platforms. They're not really knowledgeable about their own culture, but they're trying to make a profit and they're trying to come up with solutions quickly. So things like, I don't know, Hecate or some other Greek goddess is easier input than it is doing research on your own culture. This is so upsetting that in Yucatan, Mexico, about a year or two ago, a statue of Poseidon was erected on the beach at one of these hotel spots, and the native people took up arms. They were very upset about it because it was just this Greek Chad-like figure occupying space. And ironically, Class 5 hurricane came along and destroyed the statue, and then the hotel complex took it as a sign of, like, this isn't good. And it was actually in a neighboring town where they erected a statue of Chak, the Maya rain god, to replace the Poseidon one. So just because it's pagan doesn't mean it's decolonizing. Just because it's alternatively religious does not mean it is decolonizing. Another big cultural appropriation that has been a part of the decolonizing movement that you find specifically in curanderismo is the importation of chakras. This is culturally appropriating two colonized cultures. While chakras are viable, legitimate, and have their place in esoteric practice, to slap it onto Mesoamerican spirituality is cultural appropriation, especially when in Mesoamerican spirituality we have our own energy bodies. We have two complete distinct sets of energy bodies, one of 13 and one of 20. But the reason that chakras were applied to curanderismo was because it was more socially acceptable and it had easier profit margins. Middle class and above European and North American audiences know what chakras are and are willing to buy into them easier. But these kinds of practices have had the hashtag and moniker of decolonizing on them simply because they're not Christianity. And yes, that is a form of cultural appropriation and recolonizing. Alternatively, on the far right, there have been some native groups that have used decolonizing as a radical term. It is so radical that it's hard to have conversations with these people. And they are essentially racist towards anybody that's not native, including other minorities. So this decolonizing term is very loaded. It can mean everything from the far right blood quantum way of doing things, or completely far left and recolonizing through ignorance and for the sake of profit. In the following video, we will cover the 3 pillars of decolonizing work. These are 3 action steps that individuals can take and eventually progress to community based actions to help the broader decolonizing effort. Stay tuned for the action plan. For the full free Decolonization Manifesto, subscribe to the Mystery Codex on Substack. Or you can go to solomonpakal.com, which is my Substack publication, the Mystery Codex. If you are interested in readings or Mayan astrological birth chart packages, go to MayanMysterySchool.com and book now.